Hi there, this is the Common Magician with just follow-up here on an old idea. Before we continue with anything here, I just want to address one concern that comes up a lot in my videos, and that's how long they are. I just want to point out there are venues on YouTube that constantly upload long-form videos. I think the thing about those is that they tend to be more in a videocast, podcast, interview, roundtable discussion sort of format. And you know that going in. I would like to sort of reframe my discussions on here or my monologues. There really is a discussion because you can always comment, and I usually comment back whenever I get a chance. So let's call it a discussion because I'm certainly looking for your input, good, bad, or ugly, in the comment section. Let's try to reframe these videos that I'm putting out as more of a podcast or videocast discussion on ideas, okay? These are not fast, quick tutorials. That's not what I do. I like to talk deeply at length, sometimes with repetition, sometimes with redundancy on an idea on purpose, so that I can explain fully my thoughts and give you some things to chew on. So if you're not willing to sit and listen to someone talk about what they think, then you should just get off this video and go watch something else, right? This is not a tutorial in the sense that I'm giving you a method in the next 5 minutes and wishing you good luck with that, okay? I'm going to talk about something that's a little deep here, and I'm going to share my thoughts and give you a few extra things, and hopefully I'll actually cover a wide breadth of ideas here for you to consider. This is not about, a one-and-done method for a trick. None of my videos, they rarely are ever that. Usually I'm talking about something in depth, and I'm telling you what I think, and I'm doing it with articulation and redundancy on purpose. So hang in there because I think it'll be worth your time. Wait until you have the time to watch it. Yeah, there it is. So let's get to it. I've been playing around lately with a stacked deck idea, memorized deck. So there's a difference I have to explain here real quick. There's a difference between a stacked deck and a memorized deck. A memorized deck obviously is one in which the order of the stack is memorized for the purposes of doing tricks that are based on that memory of the order, whereas a stacked deck, a prepared stacked deck, need not be memorized. It just has an order of the cards which are utilized in the performance of tricks. Could be more than one trick, could be a number of different packet effects that are all put together, or a routine that utilizes much of the deck. It doesn't have to be all of it. But it is not memorized card for card, position for card. So there's a deck stack, and then there's a memorized deck. This is a memorized deck. This is for those of you who are interested in performing magic where you rely heavily on memorizing an order of cards. A while ago, I gave you what I called at that time the Common Magician stack, which was a stacked order that had a sort of logic to it that could be easily memorized, such that you could really understand it within a matter of minutes and have it pretty well committed to memory. I've done a few upgrades to that concept I want to talk with you about here. Now, I do this, again, as I've said before, with the understanding that I don't usually do memorized deck work. I don't do that. I don't perform enough to do that. However, there are some benefits, and I have been relying on a prearranged order of cards for sort of a one-off effect, and it occurred to me that I could incorporate that prearrangement of those cards into a memorized deck and still have that effect, and a better place to start off, having taken the cards directly out of the box. I could do a couple of things maybe based on that memorized order before jumbling everything up and doing the things that I normally do, mixing up my stack. So just giving myself that little extra edge to do a few other fairly remarkable things with the deck of cards right at the very, very beginning after I take the deck out of the card tuck case. So let's talk about what's going on here. This is what the stack looks like. It is cut right now. It's not in 1 through 52 position, but it doesn't matter. I think if you look at this, and it's been sitting in front of you for a while, it would be pretty hard, I think, for anybody to recognize any sort of pattern in this. This looks pretty legitimately shuffled. You'll note there's groupings of cards together where you have, blocks of red, blocks of black. Sometimes it's black-red alternating in a few spots. Sometimes there's clumps of suits together, and in other places you have, suits kind of mixed up. It looks like a shuffled deck. I mean, it really does in just about every way look completely shuffled. But there's actually a logical order to this that can be understood immediately and probably memorized almost immediately. Now, I do have in here a few discrepancies to the logical order that I'm going to go through with you in a moment. Again, because I've been relying on an effect that I've shared on the channel that I've been playing around with, that is any card at its original order. So it's the premise of the trick is that cards come in a prearranged order where they are ace through king or king through ace or whatever by suits, and I have a spectator seemingly freely think of a card, and we discover that their card that they're thinking of is in its original deck order, but it's the only one in the deck that's in that particular spot. So it seems sort of convoluted, but I've done this a number of times, and it plays pretty well. It's a kind of a fairly hard-hitting concept that people have a hard time wrapping their brains around. The method that I showed you on the channel used all of the face cards as a 12-way multiple out. I've whittled that down to a 6-way multiple out so that I have 2 levels of equivoque followed by a couple levels of legitimate questions with legitimate answers sort of to hide that, and then I have 6 cards for my outs. So I have 6 cards that are placed into the order at the position that they need to be in, and so that's 3 cards that I have to memorize. 6 cards that I have to memorize, whereas the rest of the deck is in a very logical order. So let me go through that with you here and explain this sort of newfangled way I have of looking at a memorized deck, the Common Magician stack. We'll call this Common Magician stack 2.0. Okay, so first of all, this is in a cut position. The uncut position, where the cards are in order, has the King of Diamonds on the bottom and the 10 of Spades on the top. So that is the cut location for this particular stack. And again, I have no... I don't hold the belief that anybody will actually use this particular stack. Again, it's got a use for me. But I do want to share the principle behind this so that those of you who may have been reluctant to do some memorized deck work in the past, maybe have a very bad memory. I have a very bad memory, so I can understand that. And that's the way people are. Some people memorize things very well and can use a number of different mnemonic devices and scaffolded memorization techniques to really know an order of a deck, and they don't forget it. And under even the minimal pressure of performing with people, if they're very comfortable performers, don't get tripped up. Then there are other people like us, like me, maybe you, where we can't, add 2 single integers together to do a simple math problem in the presence of other people, even under very low stress, even with very close friends. So I can't memorize things to save my life. So I need something that has a logical order that I can identify immediately without having to think about it and do any kind of mathematical conversions in my mind. So just a very small list of things that need to be memorized via brute force. The rest of it is a system that makes perfect, immediate logical sense to me that I don't have to think about. So that's what this is about, and that's what this is for. It's for those people that would love to use a memorized deck that nobody else uses, that looks good in a spread, can't be identified in a spread, but can be recalled instantly without a great deal of effort being put into memorization and recall. So this is not a 13-card sequence. Some stacks are a 13-card sequence, like the 8 King stack, or Cy Stebbins, or things like that, where there are 13 cards in an order that repeat over and over again, and the suits change around that order. This is not like that. This is actually a 10-card stack, and the reason why that's better is because if you have a repetition of 10 cards to think about, you can think in tens. You can think of 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, 31 through 40, 41 through 50, and then you have 2 outliers at the very end. So you can have these 5 groupings of cards, 1 through 10, where that repetition refers to cards, say, at the second position in the 10-card sequence, and it's there is a relationship between that position and all 5 groupings, plus 2. So that's the idea here, is that if you can put this more into a logical frame, it can be recalled very easily. So let's talk about what's going on here. Here's what the stack looks like in uncut order. So you can see down here. Again, it would be very difficult, I think, for anybody to identify what's going on here. Even if we were to count this face up, 1 through whatever, you would notice that there's nothing really here to go on. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on. And you might pick up on a couple of repetitions in there, but it's not anything that's easily identifiable. So let's talk about what's going on here in this 10-card sequence to make this work, such that it can be easily memorized. Okay, so for the purposes of explanation, I've got a fresh deck here that is actually in Ace through King order. This is not a new deck order. This is just the order of hierarchy of suits, if you've ever played a card game where that matters. You have, and there's a couple of different configurations for the order of suits. This is one of the most common ones. That's spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds. And this is how I tend to think. In this order: spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds. They're in Ace through King order, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at just one 13-card sequence here for a second, and we'll use the spades to start. We'll think about the numbers first. Now, I told you this was a 10-card sequence, as I explained on a previous video about this type of stack. So what we'll do is we'll get rid of the Jack, Queen, and King just for a moment. We'll get those out of the way. We're just going to look at the number cards. Now, in my explanation that I gave some time ago, I think it's been over a year now, maybe 2 years, I talked about the idea of moving a couple of cards out of position, swapping a couple of positions to muddle up what otherwise would be a logical sequence of numbers. So one thing I did is I took the 10 and I moved it in the ace position and put the ace in the 10. So instead of having ace 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we have 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, ace. And that helps a little bit on the outside. We need to do something similar on the inside to help confuse this a little bit more. And back then I said we could take the 4 and the 7 and swap them. So the only things you have to remember is the swapping of the 10 and the ace in terms of value, and the 7 and the 4. So now you have a new sequence that looks like this: 10, 2, 3, 7, 5, 6, 4, 8, 9, ace. And this has most of the cards in order, but because of the outliers and where they fall, sort of spread out between every couple of cards, the sequence is essentially lost. Then what I did on my previous explanation is I took the cards that were in the even position and I made them spades, and I took the cards that were in the odd position, I made them spades, and then the cards that were in the even positions, I made them hearts. And then that would confuse this even more with a variation of color. And then I did the same thing for the clubs and the diamonds. Additionally, what we did is we took the picture cards in the original stack and we placed them at a rotating location. So 1 and 5 to start with, and then it moved up to 2 and 6, I think it was, and then 3 and 7, and then 4 and 8. And then those cards that were the face cards were displacing were then moved to the last sequence, sequence number 5. That was the original idea. I found that required too much thinking in the moment, that I had to think a little too much about odds and evens. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to differentiate suits in that way. I just had to calculate too much, I think, under that other idea. Even though it was extremely simple and simplified the concept of a memorized stack, it still was too much. I needed to go simpler than that. And the hard thing about going simpler than that is that you can't very easily without making it obvious. So I came up with this other idea, however. What if all of the cards had a memorized sequence that was completely out of order, but was very easy to recall, so that no cards would arrive essentially in the order? If I counted the sequence, you'll see what I mean. There's an identifiable order to this, even though things seem out of order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on through tens. Even with the picture cards in there, you would have a lot of things repeating that would be very easily identifiable. So I came up with this idea here. What if we swapped every position with sort of a pair, an associate card? We've already done it for the 10 and the ace. We've already done it for the 7 and the 4. But I reason this. 2 and 5, in terms of their imagery, are quite similar. Right? There's kind of a mirror image of each other, a 2 and a 5. And this may not be an original idea. I've never seen it anywhere, but this is just how I thought about it. So I switched those positions. So I have 10, 5, right now, 3, 7, 2. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can remember, 1 and 10. I can remember 2 and 5. And I can remember 4 and 7 for sure, the 7 and the 4 being swapped. And then I reasoned that the 3 and the 8 are actually quite similar too. If you take half of an 8, you have a 3, right? If you put the 3 in a mirror image, you have an 8. So what I did is I swapped those. So I have 10, 5, 8, right? And then over here we have 4, 3, 9. And then the only ones that haven't been moved are really a no-brainer. We have a 6 and a 9. And these are the same exact figure, right? Except that they are rotated. So what I did is I just swapped them. So I put the 9 in the 6 position and the 6 in the 9 position. So this is the new order that I'm thinking about. Everything has an associate card swapped in its place. And I found that I can think of this very quickly. There's no conversion really involved in it. They're already very quickly understood about which card is where. So this is very confusing. If I count these and you look at them by their face, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's nothing about that is alarming, even to a thinking spectator. Those cards look completely out of order, even though they're really in exact order. they're in numerical order, really. Okay, so that was the first alteration I made to this concept. And I'll do the same thing here with the hearts. So we'll take the hearts and we'll kind of construct this as we go. So it should be 10, 5, 8, 7, 2, 4, 9, 4, 3, 6, ace. Okay, so this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? That's it. Now, what I did next is I picked, rather than going odds and evens, I thought it would be better if there was just a static card that was swapped between suits here to kind of break things up a little bit. So the first half of the groups of 4 suits would be hearts and spades, and the second half would be of the groups of 4. Four suits would be diamonds and clubs. So rather than going odds and evens, I decided just to go with my old concept of the 7s and the 4s. So I took the 4 and the 7 out of the hearts, and I swapped them with the spades over here. So I just know that in my first grouping that where the spades are at, they're all spades, except for the 7 and the 4. The 4 would be a 7 and it's a heart. The 7 would be a 4 and it's a heart. This is a lot less to really think about on the fly. I don't really have to process much information to do that. And you can see already that this looks, in spite of the fact that there's no clubs or diamonds in there, this looks like a shuffled grouping of cards. Quite genuinely. It's not very easy to identify that it's mostly spades over here and mostly hearts over there. And there's going to be some other things that I'm going to add into this to muddle it up a little bit more. So let me do the same thing with the diamonds and clubs, and then we'll pick up with what to do with the face cards. Okay, so these are the 4 suits with all of the number cards in our new order. And to just quickly look at it, this looks like a shuffled grouping of number cards. Now, you can identify that we have spades and hearts, on gravitating to one side, clubs and diamonds gravitating to the other side. But otherwise, there is a mix here of single cards that are out in color versus groupings of cards that are of the same color, but there's no numerical repetition except when you compare 10s with each other, groupings of 10. Outside of that comparison, there's no perceivable sequence to these cards. So we are, 3/4 or more of the way there at this point. Now what we're left with is the picture cards. So we have Jack, Queen, King for all 4 suits. And this is where the decisions can get quite personal. You can do whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to substitute in cards that are in rotation and pull them out and put them at the end, like we talked about on the original concept for this, that's fine. Or you could have a static set of cards that you are going to pull out and put at the end. I had one variation of this where I just took whatever, and I know we put a lot of work into these numbers coinciding with each other, but you could go from this point and take a sequence of 3 cards and move them out and substitute in these picture cards. For example, I could take the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th card, 3, 6, 9, and I could pull those cards out of each grouping of 10 and substitute in Jack, Queen, King, maybe out of order. Maybe I would put the King first and the Jack and then the Queen, so that they're not in the suit order that we find them. Likewise, one thing I can do is I can associate different suits in, other than spades and hearts over here and clubs and diamonds over there. I might, in the clubs, or rather the spades section where I have just the 2 hearts, I might take red cards that are not hearts, like all of the diamonds. So maybe in the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th position, I would pull those cards out and I'd put these in. So I would know that Jack is always 3. I would know that Queen is always 6. I would know that King is always 9. Now what this leaves me with is 3 6s and 9s for everything that I would put at the end in some sort of order for the last set of, I guess it would be 12 cards here. Now, the problem is that when you have 3 cards repeating over and over again, that's problematic. Now, one thing you can do is you can take those cards and you can just cut them so that you have half of them or most of them on one side and then half on the other side when you do a spread. And whenever you need to go number for number, you just cut it so that you have whatever should be at the top, the 10 of spades at the top, and put all those cards in the bottom for the purposes of counting. So you can just sort of manage the way that you are spreading and showing the cards such that you're dividing up that last sequence, if that makes sense. So this is where you get, personal with this. You can make your own decisions. Now, I'll take you back to you could also rotate, as we did in the last version of this, if you want to maintain that, so that you might take just take 2 out of each one of these groupings of 3. Maybe leave all the kings for the last group, but take the jack and the queen, which is how we did this before, and substitute it in 1 and 5 or 1 and 4. And then in the next grouping, you would substitute in 2 and 6 or 2 and 5, right, or whatever, so that it rotates up 1 card in each grouping, and you have to have that memorized. Then you would have different cards that you have displaced that you'd put at the end. Either way you do this, what you're dealing with is really just having to memorize, really commit to memory, just the last sequence of 10 to 12 cards that you have at the very end. That's a lot better to just have to memorize those than to have to memorize a full deck. So I leave that to you as to how you want to deal with that. Let me show you my stack, and I'll talk briefly about what made this work out well enough to use. Again, here's my stack that I'm playing around with that's in order. So this is 1 through 52 order. And again, this looks a lot better than the description I was giving about having a clump of 3 repeating cards in sequence at the end. You see, I don't have that over here. When I get down to the last grouping looks fairly legitimate. You'll notice that I have some suits grouped up here at the end, but I have that also in other places too, so it's not really all that off-putting. What I did have to memorize with this, because I was committed to 6 cards in an effect, a specific effect, that I had to memorize their positions. And those 6 cards were card number 3, card number 12, number 26, number 28, number 29, and number 52. So those cards I have to know. Number 3 down here is the Jack of Diamonds. Number 12 is the Queen of Hearts. Number 26, if we come up here, is the King of Hearts. Number 28 is the Queen of Diamonds. Number 29 is the Jack of Hearts. And then number 52, way out here at the end, is the King of Diamonds. These cards are in position such that I could reasonably describe new deck order and have them where I want them to be. So the scheme here is that for kings, I would say the new deck order in a brand new deck of cards is spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds, ace through king, with ace of spades being on the top. You've all seen that before, and that's not true, but it's a believable, plausible description of what new deck order is. And that puts my King of Hearts in place in the second set of 13 on the 13th position in that grouping, and then the King of Diamonds at the end. Spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds. Likewise, I have the same sequence for the jacks, but it starts with the ace of spades being on the face. So it would be spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds, so that the jack is always third from the end in the sequence going the opposite direction. And then I have the queens actually legitimately in the United States version of New Deck Order. There's a difference between the U.S. New Deck Order and the European one, but I do have it in legitimate New Deck Order for the queens, which would be spades, ace through king, diamonds, ace through king, and you can see the queen here. And then it goes to king through ace, clubs, king through ace, hearts, and you can see the queen of hearts is there. So I have multiple out description and location for those cards. Now what this does for me is that it muddles up the sequence even more, but I only have to memorize 6 positions and cards, so I have to brute force memorize those. It doesn't mean that I have to memorize everything else, I just have to remember those, because now I can displace both the number and the card in my mind when I'm thinking about the full sequence of 52. Now the fun thing that this did for me is it gave me this at the very end. When I look at the last grouping of cards. If you take a look out here starting with the 10 of hearts. Remember my sequence was 10, 5, 8. This should be a 7. Oops, can't see it there in the camera. Move this up. So again, 10, 5, 8. This should be a 7, but it's a jack. Then I have 2 for the 5. Then 6 is 9. So far, so good. The 7, remember 4 and 7, was an oddball grouping. And it just so happens that I have all these jacks left over at the end. These 2 black jacks. So jack of clubs on the 7, where the 7 would be, would be 4. And then I have 3 in the 8, 6 in the 9. And then it's off here for the 10. I don't have any more aces. I'm out of aces, but it's a 2. Which remember, 2 in my sequence stands for 5. This is card number 50, so it's easy to remember that. 2 of diamonds is 50. 1, this would be 51, which is a 10, just like it is everywhere else. And then I have king of diamonds here for number 52, which has to be there for my setup. So I almost get there, and I just have to remember that the 4 and the 7 are these jacks. And then what I did is I just placed them in groupings so that it made sense to me. The first 5 cards are spades and hearts. Heart, heart, spade, spade, heart. Then the next grouping of 5 cards in the grouping of 10. The sequence of 10 are clubs and diamonds. 4 clubs and diamonds. So it's easy to remember. But otherwise, my numbers are pretty well in order. So there's not a lot of memorization that I have to do there. It's consistent with the rest of the stack. Now, one other thing that I did as well, because I had some black face cards that I had to contend with, I put the jacks out here in this grouping, but I had to deal with the black kings and the black queens. The way I dealt with that was I displaced a few more that I was able to use over here. I just decided that in the red grouping, so the hearts and the diamonds, I would place my king and queen. I would place my king in the 10 spot, number 1, and I'd place my queen in the 5, because I can remember 1 and 5. So in the hearts, rather than having the 10 of hearts over here and the 2 of hearts, which I now have in my last grouping, I have a king of clubs, so the opposite black, and the queen of clubs. Very easy to remember for me. So 1, 5. And then for the diamonds, I did the same thing, but it's spades. When I get over to the diamonds over here, 1 and 5. So 31 and 35 are king of spades and queen of spades. So I just remember that for the red groupings, which is the teens and the 30s, teens and 30s, I have king and queen in the 1 and the 5 spots. So now I have a memorized deck. So what did I have to remember by brute force? Well, my force multiple out cards at position 3, 12, 26, 28, 29, 52. I have to memorize those. And then I have to remember that in the red groupings, so at 11 and 15 and at 31 and 35, I have a black king and a black queen. Black kings for the 1, black queen for the 5, and they are the opposite black cards from the outlying black cards from the group that they should be in. Now what that did for me is it gives me a lot more separation of suits. So now I can go along here and it's not so obvious that I have a lot of spades over here and clubs over here. I actually have spades over here, a couple in a group in the last grouping over here, and I have some clubs mixed in as well as diamonds and hearts. I've got, in the first sequence, I have all of my first 13 card sequence. I have all of the suits covered, and they seem quite random. So none of the numbers are really in order. the suits are all mixed up, but it's totally logical. So if I count through it, you'll see how this looks, at least from the explained point of view now. 1, 2, 3, remember that's one I have to memorize, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, there's that king standing in for the 1 in the teens, 12, memorized card, 13, 14, 15, standing in for the 5 in the teens, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All of my aces end up on the tens position in the first 4 groups. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, memorized card, 27, that's a normal one. The next 2 are memorized, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, remember the king is in for the 1s and the 5s in the red grouping, 33, 34, 35, there's the queen, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, last ace. And then this is the displaced cards, which worked out in my case to follow the sequence pretty well. You have 41, 42, 43, 44, so the 4 and the 7 are going to be jacks, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, which is a 2, 2 is 5, and this is a displaced card, easy to remember, 51, 52, memorized card. So this is my sequence that I'm messing around with. So again, what you do with the face cards is personal, however you want to organize that. But at least I'm giving you a head start here, hopefully, if you enjoy this concept concerning all the number cards in groupings of 10. Much easier to think about, in my opinion, that way, without having to do a lot of recall and memory. And it gets rid of the concept of odds and evens and having to think about, well, what's an even number? What's an odd number? What grouping am I in it right now? Now you can just think about spades are in the first 10, hearts are in the teens, clubs are in the 20s, diamonds are in the 30s, and then there's just those outlying differences with the 4s and the 7s, or the 1s and the 5s in the red group, plus my memorized 6 multiple out. So there you have it. I also wanted to talk very briefly. This has been kind of a long explanation, hopefully worthwhile for you, something to consider as you're building memorized decks, not having to brute force memorize some of the standards. And I'll tell you what, there is a benefit, I think, to making your own, and that it's something that people aren't using, right? When we talk these days about fooling magicians, it is funny to me that everybody is hooked on mnemonica. You know, that's kind of the elitist club, you're in the club kind of stack, right? And I'm convinced a lot of people memorize that stack and never use it. They just memorize the stack to say that they did, or they say they memorized it, but they really don't have a good grasp on it to really put it into action. I'm trying to give you something that you can memorize and put into action comfortably without having to do a lot of maintenance on it, without having to have a wide variety of scaffolding to recall that information, without spending months and months to get it down, and without being so nervous about using it. You can just do very basic memorized deck effects with the concept that I'm showing you and really reduce the stress immensely. So there's a benefit to using a stack that is unique to you. And I'm trying to show you a way to do that. That you can start with this basic premise and then use the face cards to make it your own, however you want to, a way that you can memorize it. Some other details to this, and I do have a couple more things to talk about in terms of dealing with memorized full deck stacks here in a second, in terms of shuffling. I want to talk about, but also there's some other things I have built into it. I just wanted to verify that I had a place where I could do an Animan random card force, and I've talked about this before with any card at any number. If I rotate card number 1 to 52, I'm set up to force the 5 of diamonds in an any card at any number. True Burglas effect sort of presentation, where if you videotaped it, or video recorded, I guess tape, we don't say that anymore, but video recorded it, it would look absolutely legit. That a card was randomly thought of, a number was randomly thought of, and that the performer never touched the deck. You could get that on recording using the pre-show concept and the alternate reality concept, right? That some people watching it in the moment are experiencing a dual reality with those that are watching on video, and it would look totally legitimate. And the way this works is that I can force the 5 of diamonds with the top 2 cards. So the way it would work is that after doing some kind of shuffling or whatever, cutting the cards, and you say, we come to a 5, and then I would do a bit of a equivoque here, just to give it a random feel. I would say, value or suit. To pick one, value or suit, and they would say suit, and say, great, this will be the suit, which will be diamonds, so 5 of diamonds. If they say value, I say, great, so the value here is 5 of the 5, and we'll make the suit the diamonds, right? So it makes them feel like they had random selection, right? I just shuffle those into the bottom, or rather just cycle them to the bottom, and they're still in order. I haven't even disrupted the order. And then I can go into another shuffle. So a false shuffle. So in this case, I would do maybe a table shuffle. So I've maintained my order. You can see those cards are still there on the bottom. Now I would say, 2, 3, or 4 cards. What do you want, right? If they say 2, I just put down these 2. And what this gives me right here is a forcing the 5 of diamonds at 27. If they say 3, I put this down, and I just mathematically force a position, being able to run off 3 cards. So in this case, I just say, well, it's not really high enough. We'll say 2 times 7 is 14, plus 9 is what's 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, right? So 23, I put those down, and then I run off 3 cards, and then my 5 of diamonds is in place. If they say 4 cards, I go to here, and then I add them all up. So you have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 22, and then I run off a few cards, and then I'm set again. So that is how this is set up to work, that there's multiple outs on the number of cards that they say. It just works. It just works to get me there to 5 of diamonds. And by doing this, I can project the concept that we have truly randomized the selection, and I get very, very, very close to the concept of having thought of card and a thought of number. And what you do is you say, you think of this card for us, and you can be thinking of that number. And then you say, I want to show you something interesting, and now the trick begins. Now I'm set up to count down to my 5 of diamonds, and I can relinquish control after a shuffle and say, and just like, Burglas, I'm not going to touch the deck, and you've seen this before. I gave a very long form tutorial on it. So I have that ingrained into this too. So that plus a couple of other interesting things that I've discovered with it that I can use. I have my aces every 10 cards from the basic stack. Which means that I could deal in every 10th card would be the ace, and I can work that into a routine where I can find all the aces or a number of other cards as well. So anyway, that's that. Let me talk briefly about dealing with a memorized deck that has to be a full deck stack. I did a tutorial recently on what I dubbed my favorite best shuffle that I use, and that was a top stock overhand top stock retention shuffle, right? It's this one here where you in-jog a card, and then you shuffle freely, you pick up at the in-jog, and then you shuffle to the break and drop, and you've retained the top stock. Best shuffle that I used by far, right? And some of you complained about how you can really see that in-jog going on, right? And I've tried to dismantle you guys as best I can. This is undetectable, really, okay? Now, when you're dealing with this, you have to use a different shuffle. This no longer can be the best shuffle that I use. I got to do something else. I'm going to have to go to one of those shuffles that's a full deck blind shuffle. So if I'm at the table, I always resort to the 0 shuffle, and I do a 2 sequence 0. So I do one like this, then I do another one, hold the break, and then I cut, and that gets me back to normal. So that's the one that I gravitate towards when I'm sitting at a table. However, if I'm in the hands, right, and I'm standing and I need to do this from a standing position, I've thought a lot about this. There's a number of blind shuffles out there on the market. One of them is the Heinstein Shuffle. Another one is the Truffle Shuffle. There's a new one out, the Truffle Shuffle 2.0 that Carl Hein did. If you know the Heinstein Shuffle, the Truffle Shuffle 2.0 is more Heinstein than it is Truffle Shuffle. All it does, I'm not going to teach it here because it's a marketed effect, but all it does is just displaces where the packets go to. They don't go to the same place. You don't have a cover card anymore. Things stay in the same place. But rather than putting the packet, I don't want to say too much, on one side, you put it on the other side. I will say this. If you want to find an easy blind shuffle that looks pretty good, I would recommend that you invest in buying the Truffle Shuffle 2.0. It's easier to perform than the Truffle Shuffle and the Heinstein. Even though it's heavily based on the Heinstein Shuffle, it's a much easier rendition of that concept using a very basic premise of the Truffle Shuffle to make it work. So you could do that. Now, all of those shuffles have one unique similarity in that they are designed to look clean while someone is looking at you shuffling the deck, right? They're the kinds of shuffles that are intended to, be like this. Now I'm going to shuffle the cards. See how they weave together. See how they fall together, right? That's what those shuffles are for. They're supposed to be more burnable than, maybe some other kind of ruse. I have a problem with that, and that's not really how we shuffle cards. If I take the time to shuffle cards legitimately like that, right, it can look like this, but that's not how we shuffle. We just don't do that. If you're like me and I'm really shuffling cards, I do it like this, right? Done. You see how quickly that's done. That's real. That's much more real, and I don't draw attention to it. I don't say, okay, let me shuffle the cards right now. I just do it. I just do it and get it done with, right? And I don't draw attention to it. It's better if you don't, especially if you're doing it falsely. So here's just the concept I want to throw at you. Maybe it's a lot more about speed and timing and sound. Maybe it's more about those things and less about watching cards weave together. There's a very nice, sort of discreet, subtle Pharaoh shuffle that's falsified that goes something like this. This isn't perfect, but we'll do this off by card. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to falsify it anyway. But you weave them together, and it works by sound. From the front, they see just the front edge of the cards. But what I'm doing is I'm actually unweaving and making the sound of cards weaving together, and then I square. It's a falsified Pharaoh that is based completely on sound. And what I want to suggest to you is, why can't an in-the-hands riffle shuffle work that way? Why not? Why can't that happen? Why can't an in-the-hands riffle shuffle just be this? I'm going to do this very slowly, and you can see from my perspective. So this is the bottom packet, this is the top packet. I'm going to riffle on top at a very stark V. Right on top. I don't riffle them together. The spectators can't even see the inside of the cards, right? My hands are covering this entirely. And then I bring my left thumb forward to cover everything, and I just spring these cards on top. I might even push it up like this so that the spectators are looking at the bottom card, right? At a realistic speed, right? This is something that follows the the real timing of a shuffle. If I'm really shuffling cards, right? That's the false one. That's the real one. I don't have to be dazzly and intentional about everything. I can just do it and make it work. And I just want to share that idea with you. I will say this. I've been doing this false thing I'm talking about for a couple of years. I haven't talked about it, but I've been doing this for a couple of years for people. Nobody ever says anything about it. And I don't mean that they're being nice to me like they know. It's just that I'm not saying, okay, now I'm going to shuffle the deck. I just do it. Just shuffle when you want to shuffle, when you need to shuffle, and people accept that you shuffled. You don't have to do something that's in your face, okay? It's better if you don't. So just throwing that out there. If you're looking for a good way to shuffle cards when you're dealing with a memorized deck, just make it simple. Make it very simple, make it very easy. That's very easy to do. Anybody can do it. Again, I'm just riffling off, start V, then cover up the front, and then just spring the top cards on top of the bottom cards. If you do it at an angle, you have a lot of hand coverage. I will say this: Truffle Shuffle 2.0, the one based on the Heinstein Shuffle and the Truffle, the better one, it has some angle issues. You really do, for the most part, want to do it kind of at an angle to make it look pretty. Okay, it's still better than the others, but that said, so deal with the angles of this and just be simple, right? That's the speed. That's the true, authentic speed of a real shuffle. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes when I'm doing this, if I'm in a card game, they don't even really riffle at the end. I just push them together. That's just, that's reality. That's realistic. Likewise, here's another one. There's been a lot of. I've seen two. I saw a recent tutorial online for this, and it's really a copy of an idea that was up a couple of years ago or a year ago or more. And it's one we talked about in the last tutorial that I gave on the overhand top stock retention. That is a blind overhand shuffle. It's the version where you take off a pack and then you pick up and you keep picking up packs, right, this thing. I just want to say, if you're doing this intentional and slow like normal people, there's no reason why this, and I see Juan Tamariz do this all the time, so just saying, there's no reason why you can't just cyclical cut cards and falsify an overhand shuffle. No reason. And then you just find your break, and then you cut it to the bottom, right? So you just play that game. So those are my ideas. Good luck with that, and happy magicking.